Hey, I'm Asher, and welcome back to the Filmcast. Today I will be reading episode 2 of my Rebirth of Mothra miniseries. In the last episode, Mothra, Nick, and Audrey were taken away by Alan Jonah and his team. What will happen? Will Audrey and Nick be rescued? Will Mothra escape and be able to defeat Gigan? Let's find out in Rebirth of Mothra, episode 2. This episode starts in Siberia. The ospreys that took Mothra are flying towards a base. Nick and Audrey are still extremely distraught by what has happened. Nick is not only scared for himself, but for his mom and for what Mothra's fate at the hands of these people that kidnapped him could be. But Audrey comforts him. Jonah starts talking to the two and explains why they were taken hostage. Jonah explains that he and his men have been watching Monarch footage and needed Titan DNA for a project they're working on, and Mothra was one they needed. And when they saw footage of Nick interacting with Mothra, they saw him as a necessity. Audrey is needed to study the remaining orbs so it can be used as a destructive weapon, and Nick was brought along so Jonah's men could threaten danger to Nick if Audrey doesn't comply to their demands. The two refuse to help, but Jonah pays no attention to their rejections. The Ospreys arrive at an outpost that Jonah and his men took over and have been using as a sort of headquarters. They captured this outpost a while ago, killing all the guards and most of the employees, and jammed communications so help couldn't be called. For a while now, they've been using the remaining employees to keep working so no one would get suspicious of the outpost, and they have been doing sinister research here. A large hatch outside the outpost opens, and the helicopters carrying Mothra drop her inside. Jonah's men escort Nick and Audrey through the base to rooms where they will be held. While walking, the two see some of the stuff the eco-terrorists have in their possession. One is the left Ghidorah head, also known as Kevin, that they bought in Mexico. They also walk past a lab where some men are experimenting on a secret project, and the last thing they see is a weakened Mothra, much to their dismay. Nick is quite distraught at the sight of Mothra in pain, but Audrey turns his head away, telling him, "Don't look," and the two are put into separate rooms. Before the door to the room that Nick is in is closed and locked, he is told by Jonah, "You are going to be very helpful." The scene cuts to Gigan rampaging through cities across Nevada, destroying everything in sight with his hooks, visor beam, and hooked tail. Monarch and U.S. military personnel are trying to stop him, but their weapons have only little impact. At Castle Bravo, Monarch is in chaos, not only having trouble dealing with Gigan, but also finding where Mothra, Nick, and Audrey were taken. During this time, Monarch is contacted by Admiral Stenz, an elite commander in the U.S. Navy, who is asking Monarch on what they should do to properly deal with the threat Gigan poses to the world. They explain that nuclear weapons will most likely not do anything to Gigan. Sten is also informed that oxygen destroyers won't work either because Gigan is a cyborg rather than a living organism. Monarch explains to him that Jonah and his men stole the last power orb and Mothra, both of which could defeat Gigan, and requests Sten to help find where they are, and he agrees to help them. Back in Siberia, Nick and Audrey are brought out of their rooms and escorted to a lab, where Audrey is forced to use the last power orb and turn it as an energy force to use to make weapons. Seeing his mom work at gunpoint, Nick is both scared and angered. The two are then brought to a giant room that Mothra is in. Mothra by now is still alive, but is extremely weak and barely has the strength to move, let alone fly. Mothra has also been tied down with metal cables to ensure that she doesn't cause trouble and try to escape. One of Jonah's men walks up to the side of Mothra holding a needle. He injects it into her and takes a large sample of her blood, which will be used for secret experiments. And Jonah's men escort Nick and Audrey back to their rooms, while Jonah stays behind. As they walk back, Nick hears one of Jonah's men ask what they should do with Mothra, and his heart drops when he hears Jonah answer, "Kill her." And Nick begins to tear up quietly as he and Audrey are locked back into their rooms. Nick, in a fit of rage, starts to rampage through his room, but during this, he knocks open a drawer and discovers a handgun inside and begins hatching a plan. Before he can begin planning, he hears Audrey call to him from the other room. She tells him that the only reason she did what Jonah's men told her to do was because she feared Nick would get harmed if she didn't comply. She tells him this because she's under the assumption that Nick flew into that fit of rage because she helped them at all, and that now he's upset with her, even though this isn't actually the case. She tells him, "Whatever happens next, just know you're the best son I could have ever wanted." She also tells him that his dad, Steve, would have also said the exact same thing. Nick responds by thanking Audrey for always being there for him, but is still secretly coming up with a plan, which Audrey is not aware of. Meanwhile, back in Nevada, the situation for slowing down Gigan is looking hopeless. By now, half of Las Vegas is either on fire or completely demolished. Monarch personnel trying to contain him are being decimated by Gigan's relentless attacks, and effort to find where Mothra was taken aren't going much better. Despite their efforts, Monarch still can't find out where she was taken. Another problem is that there is no Titan nearby that can stand up to Gigan, making the situation even worse for Monarch. They soon come to the grim conclusion that unless they find Mothra and the last power orb, there is nothing they can do. One Monarch personnel asks if Mothra will just reincarnate if she dies, wherever she is, and that if her dying will be a big deal. But soon they come to a sudden realization. The only way for Mothra to reincarnate is for her to lay an egg before death, and she hasn't laid that egg yet. So if she dies now, Mothra isn't coming back. Ever. Back in Siberia, Nick realizes the same thing, and while in his room, notices an air vent in the ceiling, which he finds he can crawl through. Nick plans to crawl through the vent and scope out a bit of the outpost to know where he's going. He plans to escape his room and attempt to release Mothra. Nick sneaks his way through the vents undetected and makes his way to the entrance of the room Mothra is being held in, but remembers he needs a key card to get in, and makes his way back. But during that, one of the vent boards breaks and Nick falls into the lab. Nobody is in there at the time, but Nick knows he doesn't have a lot of time before someone comes in and discovers him. While in there, Nick comes across 3 files with names on them, and he decides to take some pictures of them along with some of the information inside of them. As he crawls back into the vent, he hears some men coming and makes it out just before they enter the lab. Nick makes it back to his room and looks over the pictures he took in the lab. The files he found are labeled Project B, Project D, and Project Z. After reading the information, he finds out that Jonah and his men are creating biological titans, in a way creating a sort of league of evil titans. 2 days later, a series of thermal energy cannons, which are similar to Monarch Maser cannons, are set up in the containment room, which Jonah's men will fire at Mothra until she is dead. They are powered by the last remaining power orb, though they will need time to charge up. Nick is now aware of this, and after hearing some men talking about using the guns outside his room, he prepares to enact his plan to escape. Nick goes back to the vent to make sure his plan is in place, but finds the vents blocked off. This is because Jonah's men heard Nick crawling through the vent, but assumed it was an animal rather than him, so they blocked it off. Nick starts to panic as his plan, that he has been planning for a few days, has now been ruined. As this is happening, the now fully charged thermal energy cannons begin firing at Mothra, and she lets out screams of pain. Nick and Audrey are not only disheartened by this, but the screams and guns are so loud they both collapse to the floor, covering their ears. Nick is so distraught by Mothra's screams, he begins to repeatedly shout, "Make it stop! Make it stop! Make it stop!" But after shouting this 3 times, Nick snaps. He grabs the handgun he found and starts pounding at the door to his room, which makes Jonah send one of his men to shut him up. But when the soldier enters the room, Nick, hiding behind the door, runs past him, locks him in, and makes his way to a command room, which has the keycard he needs to enter the containment room. As he finds it, Jonah, accompanied by one of his men, finds Nick and asks him what he's doing. Nick tells him to move out of his way, but Jonah ignores him and tries to take the keycard from him. But during their struggle, Nick fires his handgun at Jonah and the bullet grazes him, knocking him to the floor. Nick then fires at the soldier, killing him, and before he leaves, Nick arms himself with the soldier's assault rifle and runs out of the room. The scene cuts back to Audrey, now realizing that Nick isn't in his room anymore after she repeatedly calls for him. Hearing the soldier Nick locked in there, Audrey now tries to get out of her room, desperate to get to her son before he can get hurt, but she is unsuccessful, and she starts panicking. Some of Jonah's men stand guard at the door to ensure that Audrey doesn't get out, while others try to find where Nick is. The scene then cuts to Nick running past a room only to turn back and walk in. No one is inside, but Nick realizes that this room is the communication room, and he realizes he can use it to call for help and alert Monarch to where they are, which he does. And before he leaves, he collects some supplies, a few flash grenades, extra ammo, and a winter mask he dons because of the outpost's freezing temperature, and he continues heading to the containment room. Back at Castle Bravo, Monarch is watching the destruction Gigan is causing, but during this, they receive the distress signal sent from Nick, in which he details where they are, and with this information, Monarch can send help to rescue Nick and Audrey and save Mothra. However, G-Team, who are present at Castle Bravo, won't be able to reach the outpost in time, so they contact one of their Russian teams. Even though assembling the team will take some time, they will be able to get to the outpost in time, and the Russian soldiers prepare for an assault on the outpost. Back at the outpost, Nick makes his way to the entrance to the containment room, and using the keycard, opens the door and sneaks his way in. When he looks in, he sees some guards, Mothra still getting shot by the thermal energy cannons, and the Outlook powering the guns. Nick grabs one of the flash grenades, and after taking one last breath, throws the grenade, and after it stuns the guards, Nick storms in and guns them down. He then storms the Outlook and guns down the personnel inside. Next, he finds the switch powering the guns and shuts it off, disabling the cannons. Next, he uses his assault rifle to destroy the panel, ensuring that the cannons won't be activated again. He calms down and begins thinking about what he's just done. Nick's thinking is cut short, however, when he hears Mothra whimpering in pain. Nick leaves the Outlook and slowly approaches Mothra, who barely has the strength to move. But as he does, the radio of one of the dead soldiers goes off and plays a message from Jonah warning them of Nick. Mothra looks up and notices Nick, and because he has the mask on, Mothra mistakes him for one of Jonah's men and starts to aggressively approach him. Nick backs up but trips and falls to the ground, and just before Mothra can reach him, Nick takes off the mask and Mothra sees it's him, and she calms down. Nick gets back up and walks to Mothra and gives her a pet just like he did a few days previous, and seeing her in pain, starts to tear up again. Mothra slowly gets up and lifts her wings, after which she lets out a cry in the air that's so loud, Nick drops to the floor covering his ears, and then Mothra falls silent. Nick, seeing this, becomes devastated, believing that he failed and Mothra is dead. But at that moment, he notices energy descending from the sky and going into Mothra. Mothra used her healing power, and Nick catches on to this and realizes that he didn't fail. Mothra is healing, but she is left incapacitated temporarily. Believing Jonah will retaliate for his actions, Nick decides to set up an ambush using more ammo and remote bombs he found in the room. He dons his mask again, loads his gun, and waits in an ambush spot. Now, an understandably pissed off Jonah, after being patched up from the bullet graze, assembles most of his team and orders them to capture Nick, but secretly orders them, to avoid Audrey from hearing, if it comes to it, to kill Nick if they have to, because Jonah can't afford to lose nearly his whole team, and Jonah's men head off to Nick's location. When they arrive in the containment room, they search for Nick, but at first can't find him. They not only discover the bodies left from Nick's initial attack, but also discover the panel in the Outlook completely destroyed. As they search, Nick is watching them through the scope of his rifle, and is waiting for the right moment to detonate the C4. While waiting, one of Jonah's men says he hears beeping, and at that moment, they realize they're in a trap. Nick detonates the C4, wiping out a large portion of the team. The rest of the team start shooting in a panic, desperate to find Nick's location, but their efforts are unsuccessful. Nick runs out of ammo with his rifle, but using his last flash grenade, stuns the last few soldiers and finishes them off with his handgun. Back at the command station, Jonah tries to contact his team but finds out they have been completely wiped out. And now furious, Jonah grabs a gun and starts heading towards the containment room with the intent of finishing Nick after losing so many men. The scene cuts to jets and bombers getting knocked out of the sky by Gigan's visor beam and hooks. Gigan lands outside of Salt Lake City after completely flattening Las Vegas and destroying the military resistance, and he starts wreaking havoc on the snowy city. All the military and Monarch can do is evacuate civilians, which they do exceptionally well, but the objective of defeating Gigan is hopeless. Gigan flies above the city and using his visor beam, sets the city ablaze. At Castle Bravo, Monarch personnel are notified that their Russian team is ready and are heading to the outpost in Siberia, and now all Monarch can do is wait for the results of the raid. Back at the outpost, Nick is sitting down and watching Mothra heal, only to hear someone walking in, and as he turns to see who it is, Jonah walks around the doorway with his gun pointed at Nick. Nick raises his and the two fire at each other. Nick's bullet hits Jonah's gun, disabling it, while Jonah's bullet hits Nick's gun out of his hand. The bullet also burns his hand and knocks Nick to the ground. The two then engage in hand-to-hand fighting. Nick fights hard and puts up a good fight, but eventually Jonah overpowers him. Nick at one point tries to stab him, but Jonah grabs the knife, knocks Nick to the floor, and stabs him in the back. By now, Mothra has finished healing and awakens. When looking around, she notices Nick on the floor trying to get up, only to get kicked to the floor. Mothra is both shocked and enraged by this, and with her full strength, rises up. Jonah notices her and slowly begins backing up. Mothra roars at him and smacks Jonah to the wall, but before she can finish him off, the rest of Jonah's men rush in and fire at Mothra with electricity guns. But this only has a little effect on her. Yet as they start to swarm the containment room, Mothra's antennas start glowing and absorbing energy from the air, and fire beams out of them. This is one of Mothra's powers that Nick and Audrey learned about a few days prior. Mothra vaporizes most of Jonah's men, and the rest retreat from the containment room. Mothra then uses her beams to blow open the top door to the containment room, but before she attempts to leave, she looks down at Nick, who has by now gotten up, and shows Mothra that he's okay. Mothra then crawls out, lets out a roar, spreads her wings, and flies off. Nick sees this and quietly says, "That's my girl." Nick then hears a noise and notices Jonah still alive, but almost paralyzed from being hit by Mothra. Nick slowly approaches him with the intent of killing him. Before he can, Jonah warns Nick that hell will soon spread over Earth, and the devil will rise. Jonah then falls silent, and after losing blood from his injuries, dies. Nick then limps to a rest spot and sits down, but soon from his injuries, he passes out. Finally, the Russian team arrives, first having jets blow up the Ospreys outside the outpost, and then the troops land and storm the outpost. They capture many of the personnel as the rest make an escape. The Russians find the containment room full of bodies, and one of the soldiers discovers Nick, and knowing he was one of the people they needed to rescue, she carries him back to one of the helicopters, and he is attended to by a medic. While the Russians storm the base, they capture the tests in the lab, a large egg in a secret room with an unknown creature inside, and they attempt to capture the 3 files, but those are burnt by Jonah's men as they make their escape. But most importantly, they release Audrey from her locked room, and the moment she gets out, she immediately asks, "Where is my son?" Audrey is safely escorted out, but as soon as she sees Nick, she immediately rushes to him and begins to cry. Audrey is relieved when she is told that Nick is alive and will recover, but will need to get to a hospital. Audrey remains on the helicopter with him, refusing to leave him. The helicopters finish loading prisoners, the secret tests, mainly the final power orb, and call for transport helicopters to recover the rest of their discoveries. The Russian troops report the mission as a success and begin taking off. Audrey notices a few of Jonah's men taking off in Ospreys in the distance, intending to escape, and asks what will happen to them, and she is told, "Our jets will take care of them." As they fly away, they notice Mothra's wings light up the night sky as she flies off, and the soldier that carried Nick to the helicopter says in Russian, "She's beautiful," and the helicopters fly back to another Monarch base. Back in Salt Lake City, Gigan continues his rampage throughout the city. But suddenly, a bright light arrives from the distance, and Gigan is not only blinded, but gets hit by a series of beams. Mothra has arrived and is ready to take on Gigan for a second match. The two square up and roar at each other. They fly at each other with ferocious intent, and as they are about to connect, the scene cuts to black, and the episode ends. That was episode 2 of the Rebirth of Mothra miniseries. I loved this episode, and I hope you enjoyed it too. Join me next time when I read episode 3, which is the final part of the series. Until then, peace out.